When veteran janitor Cole Palmer thought his battles were behind him, he never imagined they would reignite in a downtown corporate parking garage, where stopping a brazen abduction of tech CEO Bianca Anderson would thrust his young daughter into the dangerous crosshairs of a billion-dollar conspiracy. Stay with me until the end of this incredible story. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from, so I can see how far this tale has traveled across the world. What started as an ordinary night shift mopping floors in one of Seattle's most prestigious office towers turned into a high-stakes game of survival when Cole witnessed something he was never supposed to see. His split-second decision to intervene would unravel a web of corporate espionage, hired mercenaries, and technological secrets worth killing for, and it would all lead to a moment that would transform both their lives in ways neither could have predicted. This is the story of courage, sacrifice, and how one man's instinct to protect would change everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights of Summit Tower cast harsh shadows across the polished marble floors as Cole Palmer pushed his industrial mop bucket through the executive-level corridors. At 11:47 p.m., the 42nd floor of Seattle's most prestigious tech headquarters was empty, except for him and the ghosts of deals made during business hours. The silence was broken only by the rhythmic swish of his mop and the distant hum of the building's ventilation system. Cole had learned to appreciate the quiet. After 8 years in the Army, 3 deployments that had taken him to places most Americans couldn't find on a map, the predictable monotony of night shift janitorial work felt like a gift. No explosions, no life or death decisions, no brothers in arms being shipped home in flag-draped boxes. Just floors to clean, trash to empty, and a steady paycheck that kept food on the table for his daughter. His calloused hands gripped the mop handle with the same competence they'd once held very different tools. The muscle memory was still there, the ability to assess his surroundings, identify potential threats, and maintain situational awareness even in the most mundane environments. Old habits died hard, especially when they'd kept you alive through situations that most people only saw in movies. "Cole, you still on 42? The radio clipped to his belt crackled with the voice of Raymond, the building's night security supervisor. "Yeah, almost done with the executive wing. Moving to the conference rooms next. Take your time. We've got a late meeting running on 38. So avoid that floor until they clear out. Some big tech presentation that's running over. Copy that." Cole released the radio button and continued his work, his mind already drifting to more important matters. His daughter Amber was spending the night at her friend Summer's house, probably staying up too late watching movies and eating snacks that he'd pretend not to know about. At 9 years old, she was developing her own personality, her own interests, her own life beyond just being Cole's kid. The thought of her brought the familiar mixture of pride and fear that had defined his existence since his wife Kiara had died 4 years ago. Cancer had stolen her with ruthless efficiency, leaving Cole to navigate single parenthood while processing his own grief. The Army had taught him how to survive in hostile environments, but nothing had prepared him for bedtime stories, parent-teacher conferences, and explaining to a 5-year-old why mommy wasn't coming home. He'd left the military 6 months after Kiara's death, trading his sergeant's stripes for a janitor's uniform because it offered something the Army never could: a schedule that let him be present for Amber's life. Morning drop-offs at school, afternoon pickups, weekends at the park, and bedtime routines that included increasingly complex questions about science, space, and why grown-ups had to work so much. The executive wing of Summit Tower was a testament to wealth that Cole had once protected but never possessed. Corner offices with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Puget Sound, furniture that probably cost more than his annual salary, and art on the walls that he suspected was actual original pieces rather than prints. This was where the people who shaped technology and influenced markets spent their days, making decisions that rippled through the economy while people like Cole cleaned up after them. He'd learned not to resent it. Everyone played their part in society's machinery. His part just happened to involve a mop and the kind of invisibility that came with service work. Most executives walked past him as if he were part of the furniture, their eyes sliding over his presence without really registering that he was human. As Cole emptied a trash can outside the CEO's office, he noticed a woman still working inside despite the late hour. Through the glass walls, he could see her hunched over a laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard with the intensity of someone racing against a deadline. Mid-30s, he estimated, wearing a blazer that suggested executive status, but with her hair pulled back in a ponytail that indicated she'd been working too long to care about appearances. She looked up suddenly, catching him watching, and their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Instead of the usual dismissive glance he received from executives, she offered a tired smile and a small wave. Cole nodded back, surprised by the acknowledgement, then continued his rounds. The woman was Bianca Anderson. Though Cole didn't know that yet, he didn't know that she was the CEO of Novatech Solutions, a company on the verge of announcing a breakthrough in quantum computing that would revolutionize data security. He didn't know that she'd been receiving death threats for 3 weeks, or that her head of security had recommended she stop working late without additional protection. And he certainly didn't know that in approximately 13 minutes, her life and his were about to intersect in a way that would change everything. Cole finished the executive wing and moved his equipment toward the service elevator that would take him down to the parking garage level. The building's underground garage was part of his nightly routine: sweep the pedestrian walkways, empty the trash receptacles, and make sure the stairwell doors were secure. It was usually the quickest part of his shift, a final task before he could head home to his own small apartment and catch a few hours of sleep before Amber needed to be picked up in the morning. The elevator descended with a mechanical hum, and Cole found himself thinking about the weekend ahead. Amber had been asking about visiting the Seattle Aquarium, and he'd been saving up enough to make it happen. Maybe they could pack a lunch, make a day of it, and pretend for a few hours that life was about more than just getting by. The elevator doors opened onto the parking garage's 3rd level, revealing the familiar concrete expanse of vehicles belonging to executives, senior managers, and the occasional employee who'd stayed late to finish a project. The lighting down here was dimmer than the offices above, creating pools of shadow between the overhead fixtures that gave the space an almost oppressive atmosphere. Cole pulled his equipment out of the elevator and began his usual route, but something immediately felt wrong. The same instincts that had kept him alive in hostile territory were now sending urgent signals that his conscious mind was still processing. The air felt different somehow, charged with a tension that didn't belong in an empty parking garage at midnight. He paused, letting his senses catalog the details his training had taught him to notice. A van parked in a location that didn't match the usual overnight vehicles, engine noise that was too fresh for a car that should have been sitting idle for hours. Movement in his peripheral vision that was too deliberate to be random. That's when he heard it, the sound of a woman's voice, sharp with fear, followed by the unmistakable sound of a struggle. Cole's body reacted before his mind fully processed what was happening, his military training overriding years of civilian conditioning. He moved toward the sound with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd once navigated much more dangerous terrain, leaving his cleaning equipment behind as he closed the distance toward whatever was happening in the shadows between parked cars. As he rounded a concrete support pillar, the scene crystallized with terrible clarity. 3 men in dark tactical gear were forcing someone toward a black SUV with tinted windows. The someone was the woman he'd seen working in the CEO's office just minutes ago, and she was fighting like her life depended on it, because it probably did. One of the men had his hand over her mouth, while the other 2 worked to control her arms and legs. They were professionals, their movements coordinated in a way that spoke of training and experience. This wasn't a random mugging or opportunistic crime. This was an extraction. A kidnapping executed with military precision in the heart of a secure building. Cole Palmer had approximately 3 seconds to decide whether to get involved or pretend he'd never seen anything. 3 seconds to choose between the safe invisibility of being just a janitor or the dangerous visibility of being a man who couldn't walk away from someone who needed help. 3 seconds to remember that he'd once sworn an oath to protect people, and that oath hadn't come with an expiration date just because he'd traded his uniform for civilian clothes. The choice, when it came, wasn't really a choice at all. It was instinct, training, and the fundamental knowledge that some things mattered more than personal safety. Cole moved forward into the light, leaving behind the comfortable anonymity of the janitor's invisible world and stepping back into the role of protector that he'd thought he'd left behind forever. The war he'd thought was over was about to begin again, and this time the battlefield was a parking garage in downtown Seattle, where the stakes were higher than he could possibly imagine. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. "Hey," Cole's voice cut through the parking garage, like a blade, sharp and commanding in a way that made all three attackers freeze momentarily. That moment of hesitation was all he needed. The closest attacker turned toward him, revealing a face partially obscured by a tactical balaclava. His hand moved toward his jacket in a motion that Cole recognized with cold clarity, reaching for a weapon. But Cole was already moving, his body falling into patterns that had been drilled into him through countless hours of training and reinforced through real combat experience. Cole closed the distance between them with explosive speed, his right hand intercepting the attacker's wrist before the weapon could clear the jacket. His left hand drove up in a palm strike that connected with the man's chin, snapping his head back and sending him staggering. Before the attacker could recover, Cole had swept his legs out from under him, sending him crashing to the concrete floor with a satisfying thud. The second attacker released Bianca and charged at Cole with the kind of aggressive confidence that suggested extensive hand-to-hand training. He threw a combination of strikes that would have overwhelmed most civilians. But Cole wasn't most civilians. He deflected the blows with practiced efficiency, reading the rhythm of the attack and waiting for the inevitable opening. It came when the attacker overcommitted to a hook punch. Cole ducked under it, stepped inside the man's guard, and delivered a devastating elbow strike to the solar plexus. The attacker's breath exploded out in a pained gasp, and Cole followed up with a knee to the midsection that folded him over like a closing book. But the third attacker had used those precious seconds to pull his weapon, a compact pistol that looked like a Glock 19. The barrel tracked toward Cole with deadly intent, and time seemed to slow to the crawl that always accompanied moments of mortal danger. "Run!" Cole shouted to Bianca, who was still frozen in shock at the sudden eruption of violence. His command broke through her paralysis, and she started moving toward the pedestrian exit, her heels clicking against the concrete in an irregular rhythm of panic and determination. The gunman's attention flickered between Cole and his escaping target, a moment of tactical indecision that Cole exploited immediately. He grabbed a nearby trash can and hurled it at the attacker with all his strength. The metal container struck the gunman's arm just as he fired, sending the shot wild. The report echoed through the parking garage like thunder, impossibly loud in the enclosed space. Cole didn't give the attacker time to recover. He closed the distance in 2 long strides, his hand clamping down on the gunman's wrist with crushing force. They struggled for control of the weapon, a deadly dance where the slightest mistake would mean death. The attacker was strong and well-trained, but Cole had something more than training. He had desperation born from the knowledge that if he failed, whoever these people were would come after him next. With a sharp twist, Cole forced the attacker's wrist into an angle that human joints weren't meant to achieve. Bones ground together, and the man's grip on the weapon faltered. The pistol clattered to the concrete, spinning away into the shadows between parked cars. But before Cole could press his advantage, the first attacker had recovered enough to rejoin the fight. A blow from behind caught Cole across the shoulders, sending fire through his back and nearly driving him to his knees. He rolled with the impact, creating distance, and came up in a defensive stance that put his back against a concrete pillar. Now he faced 2 attackers, both armed with tactical knives that had appeared from somewhere in their gear. The blades gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lighting, wickedly sharp, and held with the competence of people who knew how to use them. The parking garage's security cameras would be recording all of this. Cole realized, with a distant part of his mind that was still capable of tactical assessment. That meant either these attackers didn't care about being identified, or they had confidence that the footage would be erased or ignored. Neither possibility was reassuring. "Walk away," the first attacker said, his voice carrying an accent that Cole couldn't quite place. "This doesn't concern you, janitor. We're professionals, and we're getting paid to complete a job. Don't make yourself part of that job." "Too late for that," Cole replied, his eyes tracking both opponents while monitoring his peripheral vision for additional threats. "Should have thought about witnesses before you tried to kidnap someone in a public building." The attackers exchanged glances, some unspoken communication passing between them. Then they moved as one, a coordinated assault designed to overwhelm through simultaneous attacks from different angles. Cole had faced similar situations before, in alleys in distant countries where the stakes had been equally high. He'd learned that the key to surviving multiple opponents wasn't trying to fight them all at once, it was using their numbers against them, creating situations where they got in each other's way. He feinted left, drawing both attackers in that direction, then suddenly reversed and rolled right. The movement put one attacker between him and the other, giving him a precious few seconds of effectively fighting just one opponent. The knife came at him in a practice slash, but Cole caught the attacker's wrist, twisted it, and used the man's own momentum to send him crashing into a parked Mercedes. The car's alarm erupted into ear-splitting wails that echoed through the parking structure, adding chaos to an already chaotic situation. The second attacker tried to take advantage of Cole's momentary distraction, lunging forward with his knife aimed at center mass. But Cole had been expecting exactly that kind of opportunistic attack. He sidestepped, grabbed the man's extended arm, and used a joint lock to force him face first into the concrete pillar. The attacker slumped to the ground, either unconscious or too dazed to continue fighting. Cole quickly patted him down, finding a radio earpiece and what looked like a syringe filled with some kind of clear liquid. Tranquilizer. Probably they'd been planning to take Bianca alive. The first attacker was struggling to his feet, blood streaming from a cut above his eye where he'd hit the Mercedes. The third attacker, the one Cole had struck in the solar plexus, was wheezing but mobile, his hand pressing against his ribs. "Mr. Palmer." Bianca's voice called from somewhere near the pedestrian exit. "The elevator. Hurry." She'd found the service elevator and was holding the doors open, her face pale but determined. Cole made a split-second decision. He'd accomplished what he needed to accomplish by disrupting the kidnapping. Staying to fight two injured, but still dangerous opponents, would just increase the risk that one of them would get lucky. He sprinted toward the elevator, his legs burning with the effort. Behind him, he could hear the attackers giving chase, but they were moving slower, hampered by their injuries and the unexpected resistance they'd encountered. Cole dove through the elevator doors just as they began to close. Bianca slammed her hand against the button for the ground floor, and the elevator lurched into motion. Through the narrowing gap, Cole could see one of the attackers reaching the elevator, his hands stretching toward the closing doors in a desperate attempt to stop their escape. The doors sealed shut with a pneumatic hiss, and suddenly they were ascending, leaving the chaos of the parking garage behind. The elevator's fluorescent lighting felt harsh after the shadows below, and Cole found himself face to face with the woman he'd just saved, both of them breathing hard from adrenaline and exertion. "Thank you," Bianca managed between gasps. "They were going to, I don't even know what they were going to do, but—" "Save the thanks for later," Cole interrupted, his mind already working through the next problems. Those men were professionals, which means they didn't work alone. There could be more of them in the building, maybe outside. "We need to get you somewhere safe and call the police." "No, police." Bianca's response was immediate and sharp. "Not yet. Not until I understand what's happening and who I can trust." Cole studied her face, noting the fear that wasn't quite masked by her executive composure. "Lady, 3 armed men just tried to kidnap you in your own building's parking garage. The police seem like a pretty reasonable next step. My name is Bianca Anderson, and I'm the CEO of Nova Tech Solutions." She straightened her blazer with shaking hands, trying to reassemble some semblance of professional dignity. "And those men weren't random criminals. They knew exactly who I was and when I'd be alone. That suggests inside information, which means someone in my organization or someone with access to my schedule is compromised." The elevator reached the ground floor, and the doors opened onto the building's main lobby. The night security desk was unmanned. Raymond must have been making his rounds on another floor. The vast marble expanse was empty except for the two of them, their reflections distorted in the polished surfaces. "We still need to report this," Cole insisted, moving to the security desk to check the phone. "Those men aren't going to just give up and go home." "I know." Bianca followed him, her heels clicking against the marble. "But I need to understand what I'm dealing with before I start making official statements. 3 weeks ago, I received the first threat. 2 weeks ago, my head of security quit without explanation. 1 week ago, I found surveillance equipment in my apartment that definitely wasn't there when I moved in. And tonight, a professional extraction team tried to kidnap me from what's supposed to be one of the most secure buildings in Seattle." Cole paused in reaching for the phone, processing this information. "What do you have that someone wants badly enough to orchestrate all that?" Bianca met his eyes with an intensity that suggested she was making a calculation about how much to reveal. Information that could change the entire landscape of data security and quantum computing. Research that's worth billions to whoever controls it, and worth potentially more to keep it from reaching the market. The scope of what he'd stumbled into was beginning to crystallize in Cole's mind. This wasn't just a random kidnapping. This was corporate espionage operating at a level that involved serious money and serious people willing to use serious violence. "You said you're a janitor," Bianca continued, her voice carrying a note of something that might have been calculation or might have been desperation. "But janitors don't move like you just moved. They don't assess threats like you assessed that situation. And they definitely don't take down 3 trained operators without breaking a sweat." "Former Army," Cole admitted. 8 years, infantry specialist. "But that life's behind me now. I'm just trying to keep my head down and raise my daughter." The mention of his daughter sent a spike of fear through his chest. If these people had inside information about Bianca's schedule, and if they'd been watching her long enough to plant surveillance equipment in her apartment, then they'd soon know about the janitor who'd disrupted their operation. And if they knew about him, they could learn about Amber. "Your daughter." Bianca seemed to sense his sudden tension. "How old?" 9. "She's at a sleepover tonight. But she's supposed to come home tomorrow morning." Cole's hand tightened on the phone. "These people you're dealing with, how far are they willing to go to get what they want?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither wanted to voice. Bianca's expression shifted from executive confidence to something more human, more afraid. "I don't know," she admitted quietly. "But I think we're both about to find out." The lobby of Summit Tower felt exposed and vulnerable. Too many windows, too many sightlines from the street outside. Cole's military training was screaming at him to find cover, establish a secure position, and assess the full scope of the threat they were facing. But this wasn't a combat zone in some distant country. This was downtown Seattle, where the normal rules of civilian life were supposed to apply, except those rules had just been shattered by men with guns and tactical training who'd tried to kidnap a CEO in her own building. "We need to move," Cole decided, abandoning the phone for now. "Is there a back exit from this building, something that doesn't lead to the main street?" Bianca nodded, her executive composure starting to crack around the edges as the adrenaline of their escape began to wear off. "Service entrance on the north side leads to an alley that connects to the delivery dock area." "Show me." They moved through the empty lobby, their footsteps echoing off marble surfaces that seemed designed to amplify sound. Cole kept scanning their surroundings, looking for threats that might materialize from the shadows or come crashing through the glass doors at any moment. His body had fallen back into combat mode with disturbing ease, all the old instincts and training rising to the surface, as if the past 6 years of civilian life had been nothing but a thin veneer over his true nature. The service entrance was accessed through a corridor behind the security desk, a utilitarian passage that was clearly not meant for executive use. Concrete floors, industrial lighting, and the faint smell of cleaning supplies. This was Cole's normal work environment, and something about the familiar setting helped him think more clearly. "Wait here," he instructed Bianca, moving to the door that led to the alley. Outside, he checked through the small window first, looking for any sign of the black SUV or additional attackers who might be covering the building's exits. The alley appeared empty, except for a few dumpsters and the orange glow of a distant streetlight. But appeared and were two very different things. "Stay behind me and stay close," Cole said as he eased the door open. "If I tell you to run, you run and don't look back." "Understood?" "Understood." Bianca's voice was steady despite the fear he could see in her eyes. Whatever else she wasn't someone who fell apart under pressure. The alley was cold, the October night air carrying the smell of rain and urban decay. Cole moved forward cautiously, checking corners and maintaining awareness of their surroundings. Above them, the towers of downtown Seattle rose like mountains of glass and steel. Thousands of people sleeping in apartments, oblivious to the violence that had just unfolded in the parking garage below their feet. They'd made it halfway down the alley when Cole's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out to see a text from Summer's mother, Lilia, the parent hosting Amber's sleepover. "Hey Cole, just checking in. Girls are finally asleep after watching 3 movies. Amber asked if you could pick her up tomorrow around 10 instead of 9. They want to make pancakes in the morning. Hope that works for you." The normalcy of the message felt surreal in the context of what he'd just experienced. His daughter was safe, sleeping peacefully at a friend's house, completely unaware that her father had just taken down 3 armed attackers and inserted himself into a corporate conspiracy that could get them both killed. "Your daughter?" Bianca asked, noting his expression as he read the message. "Yeah, she's fine. Safe." Cole pocketed the phone, but the fear that had sparked when he first thought about Amber's vulnerability wasn't going away. For now. They reached the end of the alley, which opened onto a quieter side street that ran parallel to the main thoroughfare where Summit Tower's primary entrance was located. A few cars passed by, their headlights sweeping across the pavement in regular patterns that suggested normal late-night traffic rather than coordinated surveillance. "Where do we go now?" Bianca asked. "My car is in the parking garage. Obviously not accessible." "Your car?" "Bus pass," Cole replied. "I take public transit to work. Cheaper than maintaining a car in the city." The admission highlighted the vast economic gulf between them. She was a CEO with presumably multiple vehicles and resources, while he was a janitor who rode the bus. But right now, that gulf didn't matter. Right now, they were both just people trying to survive a situation that neither of them fully understood. "I have resources," Bianca said, pulling out her phone. "Safe houses, security consultants, people who owe me favors. Give me 5 minutes, and I can have a secure vehicle here to pick us up." "No." Cole's response was immediate and firm. "Anyone you call right now could be compromised. You said yourself that someone with inside information set up tonight's attack. Until we know who we can trust, we trust nobody." Bianca started to protest, then stopped, recognition dawning on her face. "You've dealt with situations like this before. In the army. Different context, same principles. When you don't know who the enemy is, you assume everyone could be the enemy until proven otherwise." Cole scanned the street again, his instincts telling him they needed to keep moving. "Is there somewhere you can go that's off the grid? Somewhere that's not connected to your company or your usual routine?" She thought for a moment. "I have a cousin in Tacoma. We're not particularly close, but we're family. She'd take me in if I showed up at her door. That's an hour away, at least. And we don't have transportation." Cole's mind was working through logistics, a familiar mental exercise from his military days. "We need something closer, at least for tonight. Somewhere we can regroup and figure out our next move." "What about your place?" The suggestion caught Cole off guard. "My apartment? That's the first place they'll look once they identify me from the security cameras." "Will they check tonight?" "It's after midnight, and they're probably still dealing with the aftermath of the failed kidnapping. We'd have a few hours at least, maybe more if we're lucky." Bianca's executive problem-solving skills were clearly kicking in despite the stress. "And honestly, where else are we going to go? Hotels require ID, friends, and family are potentially compromised, and we can't just wander the streets until morning. She had a point, much as Cole hated to admit it. His small apartment in a working-class neighborhood north of downtown wasn't the kind of place that sophisticated corporate spies would immediately think to check. It might buy them a few hours to rest, plan, and figure out their next move before the situation escalated further. Fine, he decided. But we take precautions. We check the area before we approach the building, and we're ready to bolt at the first sign of trouble. They caught a late-night bus that took them north through Seattle's darkened streets, sitting apart from each other to avoid drawing attention. Cole found himself studying the other passengers with paranoid intensity. Was that man in the back seat watching them? Was the woman with the headphones actually listening to music or monitoring their conversation? His military training had taught him to trust his instincts, but it had also taught him that paranoia could become paralyzing if you let it. The bus ride gave him time to process what had happened and what it meant for his carefully constructed post-military life. He'd left the army specifically to escape the violence and danger that came with combat deployments. He'd chosen the janitor's job because it was safe, predictable, invisible, everything that war wasn't. And in one night, by making one decision to help someone in trouble, he'd thrown all of that safety away. But what was the alternative? Walk past Bianca while 3 men kidnapped her and pretend he'd seen nothing. Let innocent people suffer because intervention might put him at risk. That wasn't who he was, wasn't who he'd ever been, and becoming a father had only strengthened his instinct to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The question that haunted him as the bus carried them through the night wasn't whether he'd made the right choice by intervening. The question was whether that choice would cost Amber the stable, safe life he'd been trying to build for her. They got off the bus 3 blocks from his apartment building, a precaution that would let them approach on foot and check for surveillance before committing to entering. The neighborhood was quiet at this hour, a mixture of older apartment buildings and small businesses that catered to the working-class families who made up most of the area's population. "This way," Cole said quietly, leading Bianca through a series of turns that let him observe their surroundings from multiple angles. No suspicious vehicles. No people who seemed to be watching rather than moving with purpose. The street appeared genuinely empty, but that didn't mean it was safe. His building was a 5-story walk-up with the kind of character that real estate agents called charming and residents called old. The front entrance lock was broken more often than it was fixed, and the elevator worked maybe 60% of the time. It was exactly the kind of place that someone like Bianca Anderson had probably never set foot in, and Cole found himself feeling oddly defensive about its shabbiness. "4th floor," he said as they climbed the stairs, their footsteps echoing in the narrow stairwell. "And I apologize in advance for the mess. I wasn't expecting company." The apartment was exactly as he'd left it, a modest 2-bedroom with furniture that had mostly come from thrift stores and walls decorated with Amber's artwork. The living room doubled as his bedroom, with a couch that converted to a bed and a coffee table covered with his daughter's homework and library books. The only nice thing in the entire space was the upright piano against one wall, a splurge he'd saved for months to afford because Amber had shown an interest in learning to play. Bianca took it all in without comment, though Cole could see her executive mind cataloging the details, understanding in a visceral way just how different their worlds were. "You can have Amber's room," Cole said, gesturing toward the smaller bedroom. "I'll take the couch. It's not fancy, but it's clean and safe." "Thank you." Bianca's voice carried genuine gratitude, rather than the patronizing tone he might have expected. "For everything. Not just the room, but for what you did tonight. Those men would have taken me, and I don't think I'd be sitting here right now if you hadn't intervened." "Yeah, well." Cole moved to the window, checking the street below for any sign of trouble. "I couldn't exactly walk away and pretend I hadn't seen anything. Most people would have. Most people would have called security after the fact and let someone else deal with it. You put yourself in danger for a complete stranger, And that's not something I'm going to forget. The weight of what he'd done, what they'd both now involved in, settled over the apartment like a heavy blanket. Cole knew that tomorrow would bring consequences he couldn't yet predict. The security cameras would have captured his face. The attackers would report his intervention to whoever had hired them. And somewhere in the machinery of corporate espionage and criminal conspiracy, people would be making decisions about what to do about a janitor who'd become an unexpected obstacle in their plans. "Get some rest," he said to Bianca. "Tomorrow, we figure out what to do next. But tonight, we're safe." Even as he said it, Cole knew it was a lie. They weren't safe. They were just buying time, waiting in the calm before the storm that was inevitably coming. Because men who were willing to kidnap a CEO in broad view of security cameras weren't men who gave up after one failed attempt. They would come again. The only questions were when, how, and whether Cole would be ready when they did. Dawn came too quickly, and not quickly enough. Cole had spent the night on his converted couch bed, sleeping in restless intervals broken by habitual checks of the window and door. Every sound in the building became a potential threat in his half-awake state. Footsteps in the hallway transformed into approaching attackers. A slamming door became the prelude to a raid. The building's ancient heating system, groaning to life, sounded like tactical teams moving into position. By 6 in the morning, he'd given up on sleep entirely. He made coffee in his small kitchen, the familiar ritual providing a thin anchor to normalcy, while his mind raced through scenarios and contingencies. The coffee maker gurgled and hissed, filling the apartment with a smell that reminded him of countless early mornings in forward operating bases where coffee had been one of the few comforts available. Bianca emerged from Amber's room around 7, looking remarkably composed, considering she'd been nearly kidnapped the night before. She'd somehow managed to make herself presentable using whatever she'd found in the bathroom. Her hair pulled back, and her blazer brushed clean of the dust from their escape through the parking garage. "Coffee?" Cole offered, holding up a chipped mug that had survived multiple moves and his daughter's occasional clumsy handling. "Please." She accepted the mug with both hands, wrapping her fingers around it, as if the warmth could chase away more than just physical cold. "I haven't slept well in weeks, and last night certainly didn't break that pattern." They sat at his small kitchen table, an awkward silence stretching between them as morning light filtered through the apartment's single window. Outside, the city was waking up to another ordinary day, people heading to work and school, completely unaware that in this modest fourth-floor apartment, two people were trying to figure out how to survive a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of corporate power. "I've been thinking about what you said last night," Cole began, cradling his own coffee. "About the timeline of threats and surveillance. 3 weeks is a long time to escalate from anonymous threats to professional kidnapping attempts. What changed? What made them decide to move from intimidation to direct action?" Bianca stared into her coffee, as if the answers might be floating in its dark surface. 5 days ago, I finalized the patent applications for our quantum encryption technology. That means the legal framework is in place to make the technology public, to license it to other companies, to fundamentally change the data security landscape. Before that, the research only existed in our labs and on secure servers. After that, it became real, in a way, that threatens a lot of very powerful interests. What kind of interests? Every major tech company that's built their business model on current encryption standards. Government agencies that rely on backdoor access to commercial encryption systems. Foreign intelligence services that have invested billions in code-breaking infrastructure. Criminal organizations that profit from data theft and ransomware. Bianca's voice was steady, but her hands tightened around the coffee mug. "My technology doesn't just improve security, it makes entire industries obsolete and closes doors that powerful people have relied on for decades." Cole processed this information, his military experience providing context for understanding how national security concerns could drive extreme actions. He'd seen what governments were willing to do when strategic advantages were at stake. The fact that corporate interests were now playing by similar rules shouldn't have surprised him. but it did disturb him. So the people who tried to take you last night, they could be working for any number of organizations with the resources and motivation to stop your technology from reaching the market, or to steal it for themselves. The patent filing means the basic framework is now public knowledge, but the implementation details, the actual code and manufacturing processes, those are still proprietary. Whoever controls that information controls the technology. Bianca set down her coffee and met his eyes with an intensity that reminded him of officers he'd served under who understood that wars were won or lost based on their intelligence and strategy rather than just firepower. That's what makes me valuable enough to kidnap, rather than just kill. I'm one of only 3 people in the world who understands the complete system, from theoretical foundation to practical implementation. The admission hung in the air between them, and Cole felt the weight of responsibility settling onto his shoulders. By interfering with the kidnapping, he hadn't just saved one person's life, he'd protected information that could reshape global technology infrastructure. The stakes were suddenly much higher than he'd realized when he'd charged into that parking garage. His phone buzzed with a text from Lilia. "Morning. Girls are up and making a mess in the kitchen. Pancakes are happening, but I'm not responsible for the flour explosion. Amber says she wants to show you something she made. Can you pick her up around 10:30 instead of 10? They're having too much fun, and I don't have the heart to stop them." The message brought a smile to Cole's face, despite the tension of the situation. Amber safe, happy, making memories with her friend, that was what mattered. That was what he'd left the army to protect. But that smile faded as he considered the implications of what Bianca had just told him. "They'll come after me now," he said quietly. "Once they identify me from the security footage, they'll research my background. And when they do, they'll find out about Amber." Bianca's expression shifted to something that looked like guilt. "I'm sorry. I never meant to drag innocent people into this situation. If you want to walk away now, I'll understand. I'll find another way to protect myself, and you can go back to your normal life." "Normal life?" Cole laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I think that ship sailed the moment I decided to get involved. And besides, walking away doesn't solve the problem. They still know who I am. They still know about my daughter. The only difference is whether I'm actively trying to protect her or just hoping they'll leave her alone." The logic was brutal but clear. He'd crossed a line last night, and there was no uncrossing it. The only way forward was through whatever came next, fighting to protect both Bianca's technology and his daughter's safety until the threat was neutralized or until he failed trying. "So what's the plan?" Bianca asked, her executive instincts apparently kicking in now that they'd moved past the question of whether Cole was committed to helping her. "First, we need information. You said there were 3 people who understand your technology completely. Who are the other 2? Dr. Nolan Curtis, my head of research. He's been with Novatech since the beginning, helped develop the theoretical framework that made the technology possible. And Dr. Rianne Vaughn, a materials scientist who figured out how to actually manufacture the quantum encryption chips at scale." Bianca pulled out her phone, bringing up contact information. Both of them were supposed to be at yesterday's board meeting, but Nolan called in sick, and Rianne never showed up. "I thought it was just coincidence, but now I'm wondering if they've been targeted too. Try calling them, see if they answer." Bianca dialed Nolan's number first. The phone rang 6 times before going to voicemail. She tried Rianne next with the same result. Her expression grew more concerned with each failed attempt to reach her colleagues. "This isn't normal. Both of them are obsessive about being available for work communication. Even when they're on vacation, they check their phones constantly." She tried texting both numbers, brief messages asking them to confirm they were okay and to call her immediately. "We need to assume they've been compromised," Cole said, his tactical training providing the framework for analyzing the situation. "Either they've been taken, they're in hiding, or they've been turned and are working with whoever's trying to stop your technology." Nolan and Rianne wouldn't betray the company. We've worked together for 5 years. I trust them completely. You also thought your building was secure, and you had a head of security who supposedly knew what he was doing. Yet 3 armed men walked into your parking garage and nearly succeeded in kidnapping you. Cole's voice was firm but not unkind. I'm not saying your colleagues are definitely compromised, but we can't rule it out, either. Bianca's phone buzzed with an incoming text, but it wasn't from either of her missing researchers. Instead, it was from a number she didn't recognize. Cole watched her face go pale as she read the message. What is it? She turned the phone so he could see the screen. The message was brief and chilling. Miss Anderson, we know you survived last night. We know who helped you. We know where his daughter goes to school. Call this number in the next hour if you want to keep everyone safe. The words hit Cole like a physical blow. They'd found him already. They knew about Amber, and they were using that knowledge as leverage to force Bianca into compliance. Don't call that number, he said immediately, his mind already racing through options and scenarios. It's a trap. They'll try to isolate you, take you somewhere we can't recover you from. But your daughter is safe at a sleepover with people I trust. Cole grabbed his own phone and dialed Lilia's number. She answered. On the second ring, her voice cheerful and slightly harried. Cole, good timing. The pancake situation is under control, but barely. Did you get my text about picking up later? Lilia, I need you to do something for me, and I need you to not ask questions until later. Can you do that? The shift in his tone immediately changed the atmosphere of the call. Lilia's voice became serious, concerned. What's wrong? Is Amber okay? Amber is fine, but I need her to stay fine. Do not let her leave your house today. Don't take the girls anywhere public. Keep the doors locked, and don't open them for anyone you don't know personally. If anyone claiming to be from my work, or from child services, or from anywhere official shows up asking about Amber, you call me immediately before you do anything else. Understand? Cole, you're scaring me. What's happening? I'll explain everything later, but right now, I just need you to trust me and keep Amber safe. Can you do that? There was a pause, and Cole could practically hear Lilia processing the request and deciding whether to demand more information or to trust someone she'd known as a neighbor and friend for the past 2 years. I can do that. But Cole, if my daughter or Amber are in any real danger, you'll be the first person I tell. I promise. Just keep them inside today, and I'll come get Amber this evening, once I've sorted some things out. After he ended the call, Cole looked at Bianca with an expression that was equal parts determination and anger. They made a mistake by threatening my daughter. Now, this isn't just about protecting you or your technology, it's personal. What do? We stop running and start fighting back. But first, we need to understand exactly who we're fighting. Cole moved to his small desk and pulled out a laptop that had seen better days. You said you've been tracking the threats and surveillance. Show me everything you have. Every detail. Every pattern. Every piece of information that might tell us who's behind this. For the next hour, they worked together at his kitchen table, Bianca pulling up files and documentation on her phone, while Cole took notes and asked questions drawn from his intelligence training. The picture that emerged was complex and disturbing, a web of corporate interests, government contractors, and international players, all circling around Novatech like sharks around wounded prey. There's a pattern here, Cole said, studying the timeline of events Bianca had documented. The initial threats were generic standard intimidation tactics that could have come from anywhere. But about 10 days ago, the nature of the threats changed. They became more specific, more targeted. They referenced details about your personal life and your company's internal operations that only someone with deep access would know. Which suggests that whoever is running this operation recruited someone inside your company or your personal circle. Someone who's been feeding them information and helping them plan their moves. Cole highlighted several entries in Bianca's documentation. Your head of security quitting, without explanation. Your apartment surveillance. The fact that the kidnapping team knew exactly when you'd be alone in the parking garage. All of that requires insider knowledge. Bianca scrolled through her phone's contact list, looking at names of people she'd trusted and wondering which of them might have betrayed her. How do we figure out who it is? We set a trap. But first, we need to secure your technology, make sure that even if they get to you, they can't get to the information you're protecting. The complete implementation files are stored on secure servers at Novatech headquarters, accessible only with biometric authentication and encryption keys that change every hour. Bianca's voice carried the confidence of someone who'd thought carefully about information security. Even if they took me, I couldn't give them access without physically being at the servers. Which is probably why they wanted to kidnap you rather than just steal the data remotely. They need you alive and cooperative to access the information. Cole thought for a moment. What about backups? Are there copies of the critical files stored anywhere else? Dr. Curtis and Dr. Vaughn both have encrypted copies on isolated systems in case something happens to the main servers. Standard disaster recovery protocol. And both of them are currently unreachable. Cole felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. What if the kidnapping attempt last night wasn't the primary operation? What if it was a distraction while they went after your colleagues? The implication sent ice through Bianca's veins. If Nolan and Rianne had been taken while everyone's attention was focused on the failed kidnapping at Summit Tower, then the people behind this operation were playing a much more sophisticated game than either of them had realized. We need to find them, she said urgently. If they have Nolan and Rianne, if they have access to the backup files, then they might not need you anymore, which means the threat to you changes from kidnapping to elimination. Cole stood, his body already moving into action mode. Give me their addresses. We'll check their homes, see if we can find any indication of what happened to them. Cole, if these people were professional enough to pull off coordinated operations against multiple targets, going to those addresses might be walking into another trap. Probably. But sitting here while your colleagues might be in danger isn't an option either. He grabbed a jacket from the closet, checking the pockets out of habit, even though he knew they were empty. You stay here, lock the door behind me and don't open it for anyone. I'll be back in a few hours. Absolutely not. Bianca stood as well, her executive authority reasserting itself. These are my colleagues, my friends, and my technology that's at risk. I'm not sitting safely in your apartment while you take all the risks. Cole wanted to argue, but he recognized the futility of it. She was right, this was her fight, her responsibility. And besides, splitting up just created more vulnerabilities for their enemies to exploit. Fine, but we do this my way, which means we assume everything is hostile until proven otherwise. And at the first sign of serious trouble, you follow my instructions without question. Deal? Deal. They left the apartment together, stepping out into a Seattle morning that looked deceptively peaceful. Somewhere in this city, professional killers were planning their next move. Somewhere, Bianca's colleagues were either hiding or captured. And somewhere, people with vast resources and ruthless intent were making decisions about how to handle the obstacles that Cole and Bianca had become. The war he'd thought he'd left behind had found him after all. But this time, he wasn't fighting for some abstract geopolitical objective. This time, he was fighting for his daughter's safety and for the chance to stop people who thought violence and intimidation were acceptable business strategies. As they walked toward the bus stop that would take them to Dr. Curtis's address, Cole found himself thinking about all the small decisions that had led him to this moment. Choosing to work the night shift, walking through that parking garage at that exact time, deciding to intervene instead of calling security and walking away. Any one of those decisions made differently, and he'd be picking up his daughter from a sleepover right now, planning their weekend trip to the aquarium, living the simple life he'd worked so hard to build. But he'd made the choices he'd made, and now he had to live with the consequences. The only question was whether he could turn those consequences into something other than disaster for everyone involved. Dr. Nolan Curtis lived in a renovated brownstone in the Capitol Hill neighborhood, the kind of place that required significant tech industry salary to afford. The building's facade spoke of old Seattle money being converted into modern professional success, with its carefully maintained exterior and discreet security cameras that probably cost more than Cole's monthly rent. Top floor, Bianca said as they approached the building. Nolan's lived here for 3 years. He's very private. Doesn't socialize much outside of work. I've only been inside once, for a company celebration when we secured our Series B funding. Cole studied the building's security setup with practiced eyes. Camera coverage on the entrance, probably more inside. Secure access requiring key codes or cards. This isn't a place you just walk into uninvited. I have Nolan's emergency contact code. He gave it to me when I became CEO, in case there was ever a crisis that required reaching him outside of normal channels. Bianca pulled out her phone, checking a secure notes app. But using it will create a log in the building system. If someone's monitoring his access records, they'll know we were here. They probably already know we're here, Cole replied, noting a car parked across the street that seemed to have someone sitting in the driver's seat for no apparent reason. But we don't have a lot of options. We need to know if Dr. Curtis is okay, and standing outside his building won't accomplish that. Bianca entered the emergency code on the building's access panel, and the door clicked open with an electronic tone that sounded unnaturally loud in the quiet morning street. The lobby inside was exactly what Cole expected: tasteful, modern design, expensive finishes, and the kind of impersonal elegance that came from professional interior decorators rather than people who actually lived in spaces. The elevator carried them to the top floor in smooth silence. Neither of them spoke, but Cole could feel the tension radiating from Bianca as they got closer to potentially discovering what had happened to her colleague. The doors opened onto a hallway with only 2 apartment entrances, suggesting that the top floor units were larger and more expensive than the rest of the building. Nolan's door was slightly ajar. The sight of it sent every alarm in Cole's mind into immediate alert. No one left their apartment door open in a building like this, especially not someone who was supposedly homesick. Either someone had left in a hurry, or someone had entered by force and hadn't bothered to close the door behind them. "Stay behind me," Cole whispered, moving forward with the cautious precision of someone who'd cleared hostile buildings before. He pushed the door open slowly, listening for any sound that might indicate occupants inside. The apartment was trashed, furniture overturned, books scattered across the floor, artwork pulled from walls. It looked like a tornado had torn through the space, or like someone had conducted a violent search for something specific. But there was no blood, no immediate sign of a body, which meant that whatever had happened here, Dr. Curtis had either escaped or been taken alive. "Nolan," Bianca called softly, stepping into the apartment despite Cole's gesture for her to wait. "Nolan, are you here?" No response, except the ambient sounds of the building air conditioning, humming, distant traffic, the creak of old wood, adjusting to temperature changes. The apartment felt empty in a way that went beyond just the absence of people. It felt violated. A personal space that had been invaded and desecrated by people who didn't care about anything except finding what they were looking for. Cole moved through the room systematically, checking closets and bathrooms with the thoroughness that combat experience had taught him. The bedroom showed signs of struggle sheets pulled from the bed, a lamp broken on the floor, what looked like blood on the carpet near the window. Not a lot of blood, but enough to suggest someone had been injured. "Cole." Bianca's voice from the living room carried a note of discovery. "Look at this." She was standing by a desk that had been pulled away from the wall, revealing a small safe that had been professionally opened. No signs of forced entry or explosives, just the careful work of someone who knew what they were doing. The safe was empty, except for a single piece of paper, that looked like it had been deliberately left behind. Cole pulled out his phone and photographed the paper before carefully removing it with a tissue to avoid adding his fingerprints. The message was typed rather than handwritten, probably produced on an untraceable printer and left as a calling card or a warning. "Miss Anderson," the note read, "we have what we need from Dr. Curtis." His cooperation was eventually secured, though it took more persuasion than we'd hoped. "Dr. Vaughn is also helping us with technical difficulties. You're the last piece we require. Make this easy on everyone and respond to our previous message. Otherwise, we'll be forced to use more direct persuasion methods, and we have very accurate information about leverage points that matter to you." The threat was clear even without explicit details. They had Nolan and presumably Rianne. They'd gotten whatever information they needed from them, probably through violence given the blood and signs of struggle. And they were now focused entirely on Bianca as the final target. "They're going to kill them," Bianca said quietly, her voice hollow. "Once they have what they need from me, Nolan and Rianne become loose ends. Witnesses who can identify their kidnappers and testify about corporate espionage. They won't let them live." Cole photographed the apartment's condition, documenting the scene in case they needed evidence later. But even as he worked, he was aware of time slipping away. Every minute they spent investigating was another minute that Bianca's colleagues were in danger. Another minute for their enemies to plan their next move. "We need to call the police," Bianca said. "This is beyond corporate espionage now. This is kidnapping, assault, possibly murder. We need law enforcement involved." "And tell them what? That you're being targeted because of technology that most people don't understand? That professional criminals have taken your colleagues and you don't know who hired them or where they're being held?" Cole shook his head. "The police will take statements, file reports, and start an investigation that will take weeks or months to produce results. Your colleagues don't have weeks. Then what do you suggest? We can't rescue them if we don't know where they are." Cole thought about the problem from a tactical perspective. Their enemies had made one mistake: they'd left the note, which meant they were confident enough in their position to communicate openly. That confidence might be exploited if they could figure out how to turn it against them. "They want you to respond to their message. They're expecting you to call that number and try to negotiate." He pulled out Bianca's phone, looking at the threatening text from earlier. "What if we give them what they want?" "You mean actually call them?" "Not exactly. But we can make them think you're willing to negotiate, that you're scared enough to consider cooperating. If they believe you're ready to give up, they might get careless, might reveal information about their location or their plans." Bianca considered the strategy, her executive mind clearly, working through the risks and potential outcomes. "You want to use me as bait. I want to use their expectations against them. They think they have all the leverage because they've taken your colleagues and threatened my daughter. But what they don't know is that we're not going to play by their rules. We're going to make them come to us on ground that we've prepared with advantages they don't expect. That's a massive risk. If it goes wrong, if we do nothing, your colleagues die and eventually they come for you anyway. At least this way we have some control over when and where the confrontation happens." Cole moved to the window, checking the street below. The car he'd noticed earlier was still there, confirming his suspicion that they were under surveillance. "They're watching us right now. They know we're in Dr. Curtis's apartment. They're probably waiting to see what we do next, whether we panic or try to run. So what do? We send them a message that we're ready to talk. But we do it on our terms, in a location that gives us tactical advantages." Cole's military training was fully engaged now, his mind working through scenarios with a systematic precision that had kept him alive through multiple combat deployments. "Is there anywhere connected to your company that has good security, multiple exits, and enough public presence that they'd be reluctant to start a firefight?" Bianca thought for a moment. "The Nova Tech Research Campus in Bellevue. It's where we do most of our advanced development work. Heavy security. Academic partnerships that mean students and researchers coming and going constantly. and proximity to Microsoft's headquarters means there's always significant police presence in the area. That could work. We tell them you're willing to meet and discuss their demands, but only at a location where you feel safe. They'll probably counter-offer, try to get you somewhere more isolated, but the negotiation itself will tell us a lot about who we're dealing with and how desperate they are. They left Dr. Curtis's apartment, deliberately making no effort to hide their presence from the surveillance team watching from the street. Let them see that Bianca was scared but still mobile. Let them think she was considering her options and might be persuaded to cooperate if the pressure was right. On the bus ride to Bellevue, Cole composed a careful response to the threatening text message. The key was to sound frightened but not broken, concerned for her colleagues but not willing to surrender unconditionally. After several drafts and revisions, they settled on a message that struck the right balance. I received your note. I'm willing to discuss terms for everyone's safety, but I need proof that Dr. Curtis and Dr. Vaughn are alive and unharmed. I'll meet with your representatives at the Novatech Bellevue campus tomorrow at noon. Come alone and I'll come alone. Let's end this before more people get hurt. Bianca's finger hovered over the send button for a long moment before she pressed it. The message disappeared into the digital void, traveling through cellular networks to whatever anonymous number their enemies were using. The response came back within 5 minutes, faster than expected and more aggressive in tone. You're in no position to dictate terms. Your colleagues are alive for now, but their continued health depends on your cooperation. The meeting location is unacceptable. We'll send details for where and when you'll meet us. Come alone or your colleagues will be killed immediately. You have until tonight to decide if you care about their lives more than your pride. Cole read the message and felt a cold satisfaction. The aggressive response told him several important things. First, their enemies were under time pressure. Something was forcing them to move quickly rather than taking their time to psychologically break Bianca's resistance. Second, they were worried about the meeting location, which meant they didn't have the resources or confidence to operate openly in well-secured public spaces. Third, the threat against the colleagues was specific and immediate, which suggested the kidnappers were holding them somewhere close enough to act on the threat quickly. They're scared, he said, showing Bianca his analysis. They're trying to sound confident, but they're actually worried. The aggressive response is overcompensation for weakness. How does that help us? Because scared people make mistakes, and people under time pressure make even more mistakes. Cole pulled out a map on his phone, considering geography and tactics. They said they'd send details for the meeting location. That means they're going to pick somewhere they think gives them advantages. But every location has vulnerabilities if you know how to exploit them. The next several hours were spent in preparation. They visited the Novatech Bellevue campus, with Bianca using her CEO credentials to access areas that would normally be restricted. Cole studied the building's layout, identifying potential entry and exit points, places where someone could set up an ambush, and routes that could be used for rapid evacuation if things went wrong. While they worked, Cole's phone buzzed with messages from Lilia. Amber keeps asking when you're picking her up. She made you something in art class last week that she's very excited to show you. Everything okay on your end? He responded with reassurances and promises to explain everything soon. But each message about his daughter was a reminder of what he was risking by getting deeper into this situation. If something went wrong, if the people hunting Bianca decided to follow through on their threat against Amber, he would never forgive himself. But the alternative, walking away and hoping they'd leave his family alone, wasn't really an alternative at all. These were people who'd kidnapped 2 scientists and left threatening notes. They weren't the kind of enemies who showed mercy to inconvenient witnesses or obstacles. At 6 in the evening, Bianca's phone buzzed with new instructions. An address in an industrial area south of Seattle, a time of 9 that night, and explicit warnings about what would happen if she brought law enforcement or attempted to deviate from their instructions. Cole studied the address using satellite imagery and street view photos. It was exactly the kind of location he'd expected: isolated, few nearby businesses, the kind of place where gunshots might not be immediately reported. A perfect location for an ambush, or for forcing Bianca into a vehicle and taking her to a secondary location where they could work on her without interruption. "We're not going there," he said flatly. "That's a kill box. They'll take you the moment you arrive, and they'll probably try to eliminate me if I'm with you. But Nolan and Rianne might not even be there. This could just be a trap to get you isolated so they can complete the kidnapping they failed at last night." Cole zoomed in on the industrial area, looking for details that might be useful. "We need to flip the script. Make them react to us instead of us reacting to them." "How?" "How?" Cole smiled, but there was no humor in it. "We show up early, scout the location, and figure out where they're planning to stage their ambush. Then we spring our own ambush on them, turn their trap into our opportunity." "That's insane. You're talking about taking on professional kidnappers with just the two of us." "3. Cole corrected. "There's someone I can call. Someone who has the kind of skills that might even the odds a bit." He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found a name he hadn't called in over a year. Hunter Tate, a fellow veteran who'd served in the same unit as Cole during his second deployment. Hunter had left the Army around the same time as Cole. But unlike Cole, he'd gone into private security work rather than trying to build a completely civilian life. The phone rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. "Cole Palmer, I'll be damned. Thought you'd fallen off the face of the earth. What's it been? 18 months. About that. Listen, I need a favor. The kind of favor that involves tactical skills and a willingness to operate in legal gray areas." There was a pause. Then Hunter's voice came back with renewed interest. "Now you've got my attention. What kind of situation are we talking about?" "Corporate espionage that's escalated to kidnapping and threats against civilians. I've got a principal who needs protection and 2 hostages who need extraction. Limited time, professional opposition, and no official backup." Sounds like old times. "When and where?" Cole provided the details, feeling some of the weight lift from his shoulders. Hunter wasn't ideal backup. Ideally, he'd have a full tactical team with proper equipment and planning time. But Hunter was competent, experienced, and most importantly, someone Cole trusted to have his back when things got violent. After ending the call, he looked at Bianca with an expression that was part confidence and part grim determination. "Now we have a chance. Not a great chance, but better than we had 5 minutes ago. What if this doesn't work? What if we can't save Nolan and Rianne? Then we make sure their sacrifice wasn't for nothing. We get your technology to market, we expose whoever's behind this conspiracy, and we make sure no one else has to go through what you've experienced." Cole checked his watch. "We've got 3 hours before the meeting time. That gives us 2 hours to scout the location and set up our own positions. Whatever happens tonight, we're going to make these people regret the day they decided to threaten my family and hurt yours." As they prepared to leave the Bellevue campus, Cole found himself thinking about the strange path that had brought him to this moment. Yesterday he'd been a janitor, invisible and unremarkable, living a quiet life focused entirely on his daughter. Today he was planning a tactical operation against professional criminals, risking everything to protect people he barely knew. But that was the thing about being a protector. It wasn't something you could turn on and off like a light switch. It was who you were at your core, and no amount of civilian life could change that fundamental nature. He'd left the Army, but he'd never stopped being a soldier. He'd just been waiting for a mission worth fighting for. Tonight, he'd found that mission, and he intended to make sure it was successful, no matter what it cost him personally. The industrial district south of Seattle transformed at night into a maze of shadows and abandoned dreams. Warehouses that had once hummed with manufacturing activity now stood silent, their windows dark and their loading docks empty. This was where the city hid its economic failures. The businesses that hadn't survived the shift to service economy and tech industry dominance. It was also the perfect place to make someone disappear. Cole and Bianca arrived at the designated address 2 hours before the scheduled meeting time, approaching from a direction that let them observe the location without immediately revealing their presence. Hunter had arrived first, already in position on a rooftop across from the target warehouse with the kind of tactical patience that came from years of military training. "I've got eyes on the location." Hunter's voice crackled through the cheap burner phones they'd picked up for untraceable communication. 3 vehicles in the parking area. Heat signatures suggesting at least 6 individuals inside the warehouse. Professional setup, coordinated positions, definitely not amateurs. Cole studied the warehouse through binoculars, noting the details that would matter when things went kinetic. The building was 2 stories, primarily concrete construction with steel reinforcements visible where the facade had deteriorated. Multiple entrances, but only 2 that looked regularly used. Windows on the upper floor that could serve as firing positions. The whole setup screamed ambush location. "Can you identify any of the individuals?" Cole asked. "Negative on visual IDs, but their movement patterns suggest military or law enforcement training. Disciplined positioning, regular check-ins via radio, coordinated patrol routes. Whoever hired these people got their money's worth." Bianca sat in the passenger seat of the used car they'd purchased with cash from a sketchy dealer who'd asked no questions. She looked scared, which was appropriate given what they were about to attempt, but also determined. Her hands were steady as she reviewed the technical documentation on her phone, preparing for the possibility that they'd need to prove her value to the kidnappers. "Are you sure about this?" she asked Cole for the 3rd time. "We could still call the police, let them handle it, with proper resources and training. Police response time to this area is at least 15 minutes, probably longer. By the time they arrived, your colleagues would be dead, and the kidnappers would be gone. This is our only shot at getting them out alive." Cole checked his own equipment, a tactical vest, borrowed from Hunter's private security supplies, a handgun that he'd carried during his military service and had never quite been able to throw away despite his intention to leave that life behind, and a combat knife that had saved his life more than once in Afghanistan. He felt the weight of the gear settle onto his body like an old coat being pulled from storage. Everything felt familiar, the distribution of equipment, the restriction of movement, the mental shift from civilian to combatant. Some transformations were easier than they should be. "Hunter, what's your read on their defensive posture?" Cole asked. "They're set up for a reception, not a siege. Expecting a single vehicle to arrive, probably planning to surround and control the moment your principal steps out. I count at least 3 positions that would have direct line of sight to the parking area. Classic ambush formation. Can you neutralize those positions? Not without alerting the others. We're talking 6 against 3, and they have home field advantage. This is going to get messy no matter how well we plan it." Cole had known that going in, but hearing it confirmed made the reality of what they were attempting more concrete. 6 trained operators against 2 veterans and a CEO with no combat experience. The mathematics weren't favorable, but mathematics had never been the only factor that determined outcomes in combat. "New plan," he said, making a decision that came from instinct more than rational analysis. "Bianca and I drive up to the meeting location as scheduled. We make them think we're complying with their demands. Hunter, you maintain overwatch and intervene only if things go completely sideways. Our primary objective is intelligence, finding out where they're holding Dr. Curtis and Dr. Vaughn." "That's a terrible plan," Hunter observed. "You're basically offering yourselves up as hostages and hoping you can talk your way into information before they put bullets in you. You have a better suggestion?" "Several, but none that don't involve calling in actual tactical teams with proper support." Hunter's voice carried frustration, but also acceptance. "Fine, but the moment they try to move you to a secondary location, I'm burning the whole operation down. You don't get to be a hero if it means ending up in a shallow grave." Cole turned to Bianca. "Last chance to change your mind. This is going to be dangerous, and I can't guarantee we'll all walk away from it. Those people in there are my colleagues, my friends. They're in danger because of research that I led, technology that I pushed forward. If there's any chance of saving them, I have to try. She met his eyes with a steadiness that reminded him of some of the bravest soldiers he'd served with. Let's go get them back. They drove to the warehouse entrance at exactly 9 o'clock, their headlights cutting through the darkness like knives. The vehicles Hunter had identified were positioned around the parking area in a formation that was clearly designed to prevent escape. As Cole pulled to a stop in the designated location, figures emerged from the shadows. 6 men, just as Hunter had counted, all wearing tactical gear that was professional but unbranded, no military insignia, no police identification, nothing that would connect them to any official organization. Their faces were partially obscured by balaclavas, but their body language spoke of training and confidence. The lead figure approached the driver's side window, tapping on the glass with the muzzle of a pistol that was already drawn and ready. Cole lowered the window slowly, keeping his hands visible. "Mr. Palmer, I presume," the man said, his voice carrying an accent that suggested Eastern European origin. "We weren't expecting you to accompany Miss Anderson, but I suppose it saves us the trouble of tracking you down separately. Step out of the vehicle, both of you. Keep your hands where we can see them." Cole complied, moving slowly and deliberately to avoid giving anyone an excuse to start shooting. Bianca emerged from the passenger side, immediately surrounded by 2 of the tactical operators who patted her down for weapons or recording devices. "Thorough," Cole observed. "Professional. Who's paying you?" The lead operator smiled, though the expression didn't reach his eyes. "Above your pay grade, Janitor. Our employer prefers to remain anonymous, though I suspect Miss Anderson has some theories." "Where are Dr. Curtis and Dr. Vaughn?" Bianca demanded, her voice carrying authority despite the circumstances. "Your message said they were alive. I want proof before we discuss anything else." "Of course." The lead operator gestured to one of his subordinates, who pulled out a tablet and brought up a video feed. The image showed 2 people bound to chairs in what looked like a basement or industrial space. Both were bruised and clearly exhausted, but alive. Nolan Curtis looked worse than Cole had expected. His face was swollen from what had probably been extensive interrogation, and his left arm hung at an angle that suggested a broken bone. Beside him, Rhiannon Vaughn looked scared but defiant, her eyes tracking around the room as if trying to memorize details that might be useful later. "As you can see, they're alive. Uncomfortable, certainly, but alive." The lead operator closed the tablet. "Their continued survival depends entirely on your cooperation, Miss Anderson. We need access to your quantum encryption implementation files. The complete technical specifications, source code, manufacturing processes, everything necessary to replicate your technology. And if I give you that, you'll release all 3 of us." Bianca's voice was skeptical. "We'll release your colleagues. As for you, our employer has additional questions about the technology's capabilities and potential applications. Nothing permanent, just a few days of technical consultation in a more secure location." Cole recognized the lie immediately. These were people who'd already committed kidnapping and assault. They weren't going to release witnesses who could identify them and testify about corporate espionage. Once they had the information they needed, everyone who knew about this operation would be eliminated. "The files are encrypted," Bianca said, playing along with the negotiation. "Even if I wanted to give them to you, I'd need access to secure servers at the Novatech campus. It's not something I can just hand over on a thumb drive." "We anticipated that difficulty. You'll provide the access credentials and biometric authentication, and our technical team will handle the extraction. We have people standing by at your research facility right now, ready to move the moment you cooperate." The admission was valuable intelligence. Their enemies had resources staged at multiple locations, which meant this was a larger operation than just the 6 operators visible here. It also meant they were confident enough in their plan to reveal operational details, which suggested they didn't expect Cole or Bianca to survive long enough for that information to matter. "I need guarantees," Bianca said. "Something more than just your word that you'll release my colleagues once you have the files." The lead operator's expression hardened. "You're not in a position to negotiate, Miss Anderson. You give us what we want, or we start sending pieces of Dr. Curtis to your office in very small packages. Those are your options. The threat was specific enough to be credible, and Cole could see Bianca's resolve wavering. She was a scientist and an executive, not someone who'd been trained to withstand psychological pressure in hostage situations. A few more minutes of this kind of intimidation, and she might break, might give them exactly what they wanted. That's when the gunfire started. Hunter had apparently decided that the conversation wasn't going anywhere productive. The first shot took out one of the tactical operators with surgical precision, a headshot from his rooftop position that dropped the man before anyone realized what was happening. The second shot shattered the tablet in the lead operator's hands, destroying the only visual confirmation of where the hostages were being held. Then chaos erupted. The tactical operators scattered, seeking cover and returning fire toward Hunter's position. Cole used the distraction to move, his body falling back into combat patterns with the smooth efficiency of muscle memory. He grabbed Bianca and pulled her toward the nearest cover, a concrete barrier that would provide protection from most angles. Gunfire echoed through the industrial district, muzzle flashes creating strobe light effects in the darkness. Cole could hear Hunter's rifle continuing to engage targets, each shot carefully placed to suppress the enemy without hitting Cole or Bianca in the crossfire. One of the operators made the mistake of moving from cover too quickly, and Cole dropped him with 2 shots from his pistol. The man went down with a cry of pain, clutching his leg where the bullets had struck. Non-lethal if he got medical attention quickly, but incapacitating for the immediate future. "Hunter, we need to disengage," Cole shouted into his radio. "The hostages weren't here, and we just lost our only lead to their location. Working on it, but these guys aren't making retreat easy." The lead operator, apparently realizing that the ambush had failed spectacularly, was organizing a tactical withdrawal. He barked commands in Russian, and the remaining operators began moving in coordinated fashion toward their vehicles. Cole made a split-second decision. Instead of letting them escape, he sprinted from cover and tackled the lead operator before the man could reach his SUV. They went down together in a tangle of limbs and tactical gear, fighting for control of the operator's weapon. The operator was strong and well-trained, but Cole had been in more close-quarters fights than he could count. He got his arm around the man's throat in a chokehold, applying pressure to the carotid artery in a technique that would render someone unconscious within seconds if applied correctly. "Where are the hostages?" Cole hissed. "Tell me where they are and I'll let you breathe." The operator struggled, trying to break the hold, but Cole had leverage and position. After a few seconds, the man's resistance began to weaken as oxygen deprivation took its toll. "Warehouse on Harbor Island," he gasped. "Blue roof, south end. They're in the basement." Cole maintained the chokehold for a few more seconds until the operator went limp, then released him and checked for a pulse. Still alive, just unconscious. Around him, the sounds of gunfire were fading as the remaining operators retreated, apparently deciding that continuing the fight wasn't worth the casualties they were taking. Hunter descended from his overwatch position with tactical efficiency, his rifle still at ready, but tracking away from the immediate threat. "Everyone okay?" "We're fine," Cole confirmed, checking on Bianca, who looked shaken but unharmed. "And we have a location for the hostages. Harbor Island, South End warehouse, with a blue roof. That's a 15-minute drive from here. How do you know he was telling the truth?" "I don't. But it's the only lead we have. And every minute we waste questioning it is another minute that Dr. Curtis and Dr. Vaughn are in danger." They moved quickly, taking one of the tactical operator's vehicles since it was better equipped and less likely to be identified. As they drove toward Harbor Island, Cole felt the adrenaline of combat beginning to fade, leaving behind the familiar mixture of relief at having survived and concern about what still lay ahead. "Thank you," Bianca said quietly from the back seat. "Both of you. I know this isn't what you signed up for." "Actually, this is exactly what I signed up for," Hunter replied with dark humor. Private security work is mostly boring surveillance and escorting executives who think they're more important than they actually are. This is the first time in months that someone's actually shot at me. Kind of refreshing. Cole didn't share Hunter's enthusiasm for combat, but he understood the sentiment. There was something clarifying about situations where the stakes were life and death, where your training and instincts were the only things between survival and disaster. He'd never enjoyed fighting, but he'd always been good at it. Harbor Island emerged from the darkness like an industrial ghost, its warehouses and shipping facilities mostly empty this late at night. Finding the building with the blue roof was surprisingly easy. It stood out against the gray and brown of the surrounding structures, like a landmark designed to be identified from a distance. Too obvious, Hunter observed as they approached. If they told us about this location under duress, they'd pick something that would be hard to find or take time to locate. The fact that it's this easy to identify suggests either he was telling the truth, or this is another trap. Only one way to find out, Cole said, checking his weapon and preparing for whatever came next. Let's go get those hostages. The warehouse with the blue roof sat in darkness, its silhouette stark against the night sky. Cole approached with tactical precision, Hunter flanking him, while Bianca remained in the vehicle with its instructions to drive away at the first sign of serious trouble. The building's exterior showed signs of abandonment, broken windows, graffiti tags, and weeds growing through cracks in the concrete. Heat signatures on the lower level, Hunter whispered, checking a thermal scanner he'd pulled from his equipment bag. 2 stationary, probably restrained. 1 mobile, likely a guard. Could be more that I'm not detecting. Cole nodded, processing the information. The tactical situation was clearer now, but no less dangerous. They needed to extract 2 hostages while neutralizing at least 1 guard, possibly more, without knowing the full layout of the basement level. Entry point? He asked. Loading dock on the east side. Doors been forced open recently, probably how they brought the hostages in. Hunter gestured toward a section of the building where a metal door hung slightly ajar. We go in quiet, assess the situation, then adapt based on what we find. They moved through the blind darkness like shadows, their training evident in every deliberate step. The loading dock door opened onto a corridor that smelled of rust and decay, the kind of neglect that came from years of disuse. Emergency lighting flickered intermittently, creating pools of sickly illumination that barely pushed back the shadows. The stairwell to the basement was exactly where the thermal scan suggested it would be. Cole descended first, his weapon raised and ready, while Hunter covered from above. Each step felt like it took an eternity, the metal stairs creaking softly under his weight despite his efforts to move silently. At the bottom, a single door stood between them and whatever lay beyond. Cole pressed his ear against the wood, listening for sounds that would tell him what to expect. He could hear voices, one male, speaking in Russian, and the faint sound of someone breathing heavily, as if in pain. He held up 3 fingers to Hunter, counting down silently. 3, 2, 1. The door crashed open under Cole's boot, and he swept into the room with his weapon tracking for targets. The scene crystallized in an instant. Nolan and Rianne bound to chairs just as they'd been shown in the video, and a single guard who was reaching for his weapon but moving too slowly. Cole closed the distance and delivered a devastating strike to the guard's wrist, sending the pistol clattering across the concrete floor. A follow-up elbow to the temple dropped the man unconscious before he could call for backup. Clear, Cole called to Hunter, who immediately moved to check Rianne's restraints while Cole worked on freeing Nolan. Cole Palmer? Nolan's voice was thick with pain and confusion. What are you doing here? How did you find us? Long story. Can you walk? I think my arm is broken, and they did something to my ribs, but I can move. Nolan struggled to his feet with Cole's help, wincing at every movement. Rianne was in better physical condition, but clearly traumatized by her ordeal. Bianca, she gasped as Hunter cut through her restraints. They kept asking about Bianca. They wanted to know how to access the encryption servers. She's safe. We're getting you both out of here. Hunter helped Rianne stand, supporting her weight as she found her balance. The extraction went smoothly until they reached the ground floor. That's when they heard vehicles arriving outside, multiple engines, coordinated timing, the unmistakable sound of reinforcements responding to the warehouse. Back door, Cole decided immediately, changing their route toward a secondary exit he'd spotted during their initial entry. Move fast, but stay quiet. They emerged into an alley behind the warehouse just as flashlights began sweeping the interior they'd left moments before. The timing had been closer than Cole would have liked, but they'd gotten what they came for: 2 hostages who were alive and who might have information about their captors. Getting back to the vehicle required crossing open ground that left them exposed, but desperation and adrenaline made it possible. By the time shouts erupted from the warehouse behind them, they were already pulling away, leaving Harbor Island and its industrial nightmares in the rearview mirror. They regrouped at a 24-hour diner in a neighborhood where asking questions wasn't part of the local culture. Nolan's arm needed medical attention, but he refused to go to a hospital until he'd explained what had happened during his captivity. They weren't after the technology, Nolan said, cradling his injured arm against his chest. I mean, they wanted it, but that wasn't their primary objective. They kept asking about something else. Something I didn't understand at first. What were they asking about? Bianca leaned forward, her executive focus cutting through exhaustion. They wanted to know about the defense applications. Specifically, they kept pressing me about whether the quantum encryption could be reversed, whether it could be used not just to protect data, but to break existing encryption systems. Nolan's voice carried the weight of someone who'd realized a terrible truth under duress. Someone wants to weaponize your technology, Bianca. The implications settled over the table like a heavy fog. Quantum encryption that could protect data was valuable. But quantum encryption that could break through existing security systems was a weapon that would fundamentally alter global power structures. Who was asking these questions? Cole pressed. Rianne spoke up, her voice steadier now that she was safe. The interrogators were contractors, but they mentioned their employer once. They called him Carson, Victor Carson. Bianca's face went pale. Victor Carson is the CEO of Cyberdyne Defense Solutions. They're one of the largest military contractors in the country, specializing in intelligence systems and cyber warfare capabilities. Why would a defense contractor want to stop your technology? Hunter asked. Because they don't want to stop it, Bianca replied, pieces falling into place in her mind. They want to control it. If Cyberdyne could monopolize quantum encryption technology, they'd have a strategic advantage worth hundreds of billions of dollars. Military contracts, intelligence agency partnerships, corporate licensing, they'd control the future of data security. Cole thought about the tactical operators they'd faced, the professional coordination, the expensive equipment. A company like that would have the resources to hire private military contractors, conduct corporate espionage, and eliminate obstacles without getting their own hands dirty. We need to expose them, Rianne said. Go public with what they've done. Show the world that they're willing to kidnap and kill to control this technology. And say what? Hunter's pragmatism cut through the righteous anger. That you were kidnapped by contractors who mentioned a name once during interrogation? That's not evidence, that's hearsay. Any decent lawyer would tear it apart in minutes. The group fell silent, each person grappling with the frustrating reality that knowing who was behind the conspiracy and proving it were two very different things. That's when Bianca's phone buzzed with an incoming call from a number she didn't recognize. She put it on speaker, and a smooth male voice filled the diner booth. Miss Anderson, my name is Victor Carson. I believe we have some matters to discuss. Victor Carson's voice carried the practiced charm of someone accustomed to negotiating from positions of power. I understand you've had a difficult few days. My sincere apologies for the methods employed by overzealous contractors. Sometimes, security consultants exceed their mandates. Overzealous? Bianca's voice dripped with contempt. Your people kidnapped my colleagues, threatened my life, and terrorized innocent people. That's not exceeding a mandate. That's criminal conspiracy. Strong words, Miss Anderson. Words that would require substantial proof to make actionable in any legal setting. Carson's tone remained pleasant, almost amused. But I'm not calling to debate legalities. I'm calling to make you an offer that I think you'll find very reasonable. Cole gestured for Bianca to keep him talking, to draw out information they could potentially use. She nodded, understanding. What kind of offer? Cyberdyne wants to acquire Novatech Solutions. Full market value plus a 30% premium, immediate cash payment, and guaranteed positions for you and your key personnel. You continue your research with unlimited funding and resources, but under the umbrella of a company that can properly protect and commercialize your innovations. The offer was substantial, probably worth hundreds of millions of dollars. For someone who'd been running a startup on limited resources, it would be life-changing money. And if I refuse? Bianca asked. Then we continue our current trajectory, which benefits no one. Your colleagues have already been traumatized, your security has been compromised, and every day you resist puts more people at risk. Carson's voice hardened slightly. Or you could accept reality that quantum encryption technology is too important to be controlled by a small startup without adequate protection. Work with us, and everyone wins. Cole recognized the tactic. Carson was offering a carrot after his contractors had wielded the stick, creating a false binary where cooperation looked like the only rational choice. I need time to consider, Bianca said. You have 24 hours. After that, my offer expires, and we explore alternative approaches to securing the technology. Carson ended the call without waiting for a response. The diner booth fell silent again. But this time, the silence carried different weight. They finally had confirmation of who was behind the attacks, but they still lacked proof that would hold up in court. We record him, Cole said suddenly. Get him to admit on tape what his contractors did. Admission of conspiracy, maybe even direct orders for the kidnappings. That becomes evidence. How do we get him to confess? Rianne asked. Bianca smiled, and for the first time since this nightmare began, it was a smile of genuine confidence. We use what he wants most against him. We tell him I'm ready to accept his offer, but only if we meet in person to finalize details. Then we record everything. Hunter nodded slowly. It's risky. He'll have security, probably the same contractors who've been hunting you. Getting him to talk freely will require making him feel completely in control. Then that's what we give him, Cole said. The illusion of victory, right, before we take it away. The meeting with Victor Carson took place at a downtown Seattle hotel, in a conference room that Bianca had insisted upon for its public location and security cameras. Cole wore a concealed recording device, as did Bianca, ensuring redundant coverage of whatever Carson might say. Carson arrived with 2 bodyguards but exuded the confidence of someone who believed he'd already won. Miss Anderson, I'm pleased you've chosen the reasonable path. Shall we discuss terms? Bianca played her part perfectly, acting like an entrepreneur who'd been beaten down by circumstances and was ready to accept defeat. She asked questions about the acquisition, about her role in the combined company, about guarantees for her staff. And Carson, believing he was simply closing a business deal, talked freely. He mentioned the contractors he'd hired, the surveillance he'd authorized, the pressure campaign designed to force Bianca's cooperation. Each admission was captured clearly on multiple recording devices. I admire your persistence, Carson said at one point, his guard completely down. Most people would have folded after the first kidnapping attempt. But ultimately, market forces always win. Technology, this valuable, can't remain in the hands of idealists. You're right about one thing, Bianca said, her demeanor shifting from defeated to determined. Technology, this valuable, can't be controlled by criminals. She pressed a button on her phone, and suddenly the conference room's display screens lit up with news broadcasts. Every major outlet was running the same story. Novatech's quantum encryption technology was being released as open-source software, freely available to anyone who wanted to use it. Carson's face went from confident to horrified in seconds. What have you done? I've made sure that no one can monopolize this technology. Not you, not any government, not any criminal organization. It belongs to the world now. Bianca stood, gathering her materials. And as for your admission about kidnapping and corporate espionage, I believe the FBI agents waiting outside will want to discuss that with you. 3 months later, Cole stood in the kitchen of a new house, in a quiet suburb outside Seattle. It was larger than his old apartment, with a proper bedroom for Amber and a backyard where their dog could run. The down payment had come from Bianca, part of a consulting contract that paid him more for advising on security matters than he'd made in a year as a janitor. Amber burst through the front door, home from school and full of stories about her science project. She decided to study renewable energy, inspired by the news coverage of her father's role in protecting important technology. "Daddy, Miss Anderson is on TV again," she called, pointing to the tablet where a news segment was playing. "She's talking about how technology should help everyone, not just rich people." Cole smiled, watching Bianca receive an award for innovation and ethical business practices. The release of the quantum encryption as open source had transformed her from a CEO under siege into a champion of technological accessibility. Cyberdyne Defense Solutions was facing federal charges, and Victor Carson was awaiting trial. "She's pretty smart," Amber observed. "Is she your friend now?" "Yeah, sweetheart. I guess she is." That evening, Bianca stopped by for dinner, something that had become a weekly ritual. She'd stepped down as CEO of Novatech, choosing instead to focus on research and mentoring young scientists. The company was thriving under new leadership, its open-source approach creating partnerships across dozens of industries. Hunter called, she mentioned over dessert. "He wants to. I know if we're interested in another security consultation. Some biotech startup is getting threatening letters." Cole looked at Amber, who was showing Bianca her science project with enthusiasm that reminded him so much of her mother. He thought about the quiet life he'd built, the safety he'd fought to maintain. "Tell him maybe," Cole said, "but only if it doesn't interfere with being a dad." Bianca smiled. "I'll let him know. Though somehow I think you've figured out how to be both a protector and a father. That's a rare combination." Later, after Bianca had left and Amber was asleep, Cole sat on his back porch and looked at the stars. He'd left the military to escape violence, but he'd learned that protection wasn't about avoiding conflict. It was about standing up when people needed help, even when it was difficult. He was still a janitor at heart, cleaning up messes that others couldn't handle. But now he did it by choice, on his terms, and always with the knowledge that the most important person in his life was safe, happy, and learning that courage meant helping others even when it was scary. The war he'd thought was over had found him, but he'd turned it into something better, a reminder that ordinary people could make extraordinary differences when they refused to look away from injustice. And that, Cole thought, as he headed inside to check on his sleeping daughter one more time, was a victory worth fighting for. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.